They built a statue of the ship in Geneva, 40 meters tall, polished titanium, positioned in the center of the new Unity Plaza where the old Palais des Nations used to stand before the bombardments. The plaque at the base reads, "To the crew of the ESV Olive Branch, who carried no weapons and brought peace to a galaxy at war. Humanity's finest hour." There was a ceremony, 600,000 people, every head of state still breathing. A children's choir sang something about stars, and the word courage was used 47 times in 17 different languages across the speeches I was forced to attend. I stood on the platform in my dress uniform with my 4 surviving crew members and smiled for the cameras, because that's what you do when the world calls you a hero and you can't tell them what you actually are. My name is Captain Rena Vasquez. I commanded the Olive Branch, and I need to tell you what really happened, because in 3 days, I'm going to stand before a closed session of the UN Security Council and deliver a report that will either be buried in a classification vault so deep it might as well not exist, or will end the celebration and start something much worse. I don't know which outcome I'm hoping for. I don't know if there's a version of the truth that doesn't poison everything it touches, but I know that the statue in Geneva is a lie, built on a thing I did that the word courage doesn't come close to describing, and I'm running out of time to decide what to do about it. Here's the version the world knows. 6 months ago,
after 2 years of interstellar war that killed approximately 300 million human beings across 12 colony systems, the United Earth government authorized a final diplomatic mission. 1 ship, no weapons, no military escort, no fleet support. The Olive Branch would travel alone into the heart of the Cathari hegemony, the largest and most aggressive of the 4 alien empires that had been systematically dismantling human space since first contact went wrong. And it would deliver a proposal for unconditional peace negotiations. The logic, as presented to the public, was that humanity had nothing left to lose, and that sending an unarmed vessel was the ultimate demonstration of good faith. If the Cathari destroyed us, we were no worse off than we already were. If they listened, maybe something could be saved. The Olive Branch entered Cathari space at 0900 UTC on March 14th. By 0947, the Cathari hegemony had transmitted a formal surrender to every human receiver in range. By 1003, the Dreth hierarchy, the Tyranny collective, and the Veshon dominion had followed suit. 4 empires, 4 unconditional surrenders, all within 63 minutes of a single unarmed human ship crossing into hostile territory. The war was over. Humanity had won. And we had won. According to every news outlet, every historian, every political analyst on every surviving colony, through an act of breathtaking moral courage that proved the power of peaceful intention. That is the version. That is the story the statue tells. And almost none of it is true. The Olive Branch was unarmed. That part is accurate. We carried no kinetic weapons, no energy weapons, no missiles, no torpedoes, no defensive systems beyond standard navigational shielding. The ship had been stripped before departure, visibly, verifiably, provocatively unarmed. The Cathari would scan us the moment we entered their space, and they would find exactly what we wanted them to find: an empty ship with a crew of 9 and no capacity for violence whatsoever. What the Cathari scans would not find, because it was not a weapon and did not register on any weapons detection system ever designed by any species, was what we were actually carrying. It was in the cargo hold. It was the size of a standard shipping container. It was powered down, inert, and shielded by a casing that, to any scanner, looked like medical equipment, which, in a sense, it was. In the same sense that a scalpel is medical equipment when a surgeon uses it, and something else entirely when it's held to a throat. I need to go back further. I need to tell you about Dr. Lien Huang, because without Lien, there is no Olive Branch, there is no surrender, and there is no statue in Geneva. Lien was a quantum physicist attached to the UEG's Advanced Research Division, which is the polite name for the weapons development program that every government denied existed during the war. She was 43 years old, brilliant in a way that made other brilliant people uncomfortable, and she had spent 2 years working on a project that her division chief described to me, in the briefing that changed my life, as the only thing that will end this war that isn't the extinction of our species. The project was called Resonance. But I won't pretend to understand the physics completely, because Lien explained them to me 3 times, and each time I understood less. But the principle, stripped to its essence, was this.
Every inhabited planet in the galaxy exists in a state of gravitational equilibrium. The mass of the planet, the density of its core, the orbital mechanics of its star system, all of it balances in a precise configuration that allows the planet to exist as a stable body. Resonance was a technology that could destabilize that equilibrium, not destroy the planet, not shatter it or burn it or irradiate it. Destabilize it, shift the gravitational harmonics of a planetary body by a fraction of a percent, just enough to trigger a cascade of tectonic, volcanic, and atmospheric disruption that would, over a period of approximately 72 hours, or render the planet uninhabitable, not destroyed, ruined, every city shaken apart, every coastline drowned, every atmosphere choked with volcanic particulate, every living thing on the surface dead within a week. But the planet itself would still be there, orbiting its star, a tombstone the size of a world, visible from space, a permanent reminder of what had been done. Lean described it to me with the flat precision of a scientist who has been staring at her own creation long enough to stop being horrified by it. She said it was clean, efficient, undetectable until activation, and, once activated, irreversible. There was no defense because there was nothing to defend against. The weapon didn't attack the planet. It simply told the planet's own gravity to disagree with itself, and physics did the rest. The device in our cargo hold was a resonance transmitter, powered down, inert, and tuned, Leon told me, to the gravitational signature of Cathari Prime, the Cathari homeworld. 11 billion inhabitants, the political, cultural, and spiritual center of the largest empire in the galaxy. One activation signal transmitted from anywhere within range, and within 72 hours, Cathari Prime would be rubble and ash and the silence of 11 billion dead. That was what the olive branch was carrying into Cathari space. Not a peace proposal. An ultimatum. And the crew, my crew, 9 people in an unarmed ship, were the delivery mechanism for the most devastating threat in the history of warfare. I need to tell you about the briefing, because the briefing is where the lie was built, and the lie is the foundation of the statue in Geneva. And if I don't take the lie apart piece by piece, nobody will understand why what happened next was not courage, but something much colder. The briefing was conducted by Admiral Chen Wei-lin, the highest-ranking military officer in the UEG, in a room beneath the ruins of the Sydney Command Complex. There were 11 people present. Myself, my crew, Lean, Admiral Chen, and Director Amari Osei of the UEG's Office of Strategic Communications, whose presence at a military briefing should have told me everything I needed to know about how this mission was going to be framed. Admiral Chen laid out the situation. Humanity was losing the war. Not slowly, rapidly. 12 colony systems had fallen. Earth had been bombarded twice. The fleet was at 30% strength. The Cathari, Dreth, Tirani, and Vishan had formed an informal coalition that, while not officially allied, had agreed to stop fighting each other long enough to finish wiping us out. Estimated time to total human extinction, 14 months. There was no conventional military option. There was no diplomatic option because every diplomatic overture had been rejected or ignored. There was only resonance, but resonance had a problem. The device worked. Lean had tested it on an uninhabited planetoid, and the results were exactly as projected. But using it, actually deploying it against an inhabited world, would make humanity the first species in galactic history to destroy a planet. Not bombard it, not irradiate it, destroy its capacity to support life permanently, deliberately, as an act of war. The political consequences, even if we won, would be catastrophic. Every species in the galaxy would view us as an existential threat. We would win the war and lose every potential ally, every trade partner, every diplomatic relationship we might ever need. We would survive, but we would survive as the monsters. Unless, Chen said, we could win without using it. Unless we could make the Cathari surrender by demonstrating that we had the capability and the willingness to use it without actually activating it. A threat, not an act. A bluff backed by the most terrifying technology ever created. That was the olive branch, not a peace mission, a delivery system for a threat so enormous that the act of making it would, if it worked, end the war without a single additional death. We would fly into Cathari space, unarmed. We would request a meeting with the Cathari High Command. We would show them the resonance transmitter, explain what it did, provide proof that it worked, and tell them that if the war did not end immediately, Cathari Prime would be the first target. And then we would extend the same threat to the Dreth, the Tirani, and the Vaishon. Surrender, or your homeworld becomes a monument to your refusal. Director Osei then explained the communication strategy. The public would be told that the Olive Branch was a diplomatic mission carrying a peace proposal. The phrase unarmed ship would be emphasized repeatedly. The narrative would be constructed around courage, vulnerability, and humanity's refusal to surrender its moral identity even in the face of extinction. If the mission succeeded, if the Empire surrendered, the public story would be that they had been moved by humanity's bravery. But the resonance device would never be mentioned. The threat would never be acknowledged. The surrender would be attributed to diplomacy, to moral clarity, to the power of peace. Chen looked at me and said, "Captain Vasquez, you are being asked to save the human species. The method is the only one available. The cover story is necessary to preserve our future relationships. And you will be remembered as a hero, because that is the story we are going to tell." I said yes. Of course, I said yes. 300 million dead, 14 months to extinction, an unarmed ship carrying the end of a world in its cargo hold, and the hope that showing it would be enough. What would you have said? We launched 3 days later. The crew knew. All 9 of us knew exactly what was in the cargo hold and exactly what we were doing. We had been selected specifically for our ability to maintain the fiction, to look peaceful, to sound diplomatic, to be the face of a mission that the public would believe was about olive branches and not about planetary annihilation. We were actors, every one of us, playing the role of peacemakers while sitting on a device that could end a civilization. The transit to Cathari space took 11 days. 11 days in a ship that felt like a coffin. 11 days of looking at my crew and knowing that we were either going to save the human species or start the worst chapter of its history. Lean spent most of the transit in the cargo hold, running diagnostics on the resonance transmitter, making sure it was functional, making sure the demonstration data was ready, making sure the Cathari would believe us. She was the quietest person on the ship. She had designed the thing that was going to make the threat credible, and she carried that knowledge with a stillness that I initially mistook for calm and later recognized as something much heavier. On the 10th night, I found her sitting alone in the observation lounge, looking at the stars. I sat down next to her. I didn't say anything. After a while, she said, without looking at me, "I ran the numbers again. If they don't believe us, if they call the bluff, if we have to actually activate it." She paused. 11 billion people, 72 hours, and the planet stays there afterward, orbiting its star, dead for millions of years, a grave you can see from light years away. I asked her if she thought they would believe us. She said, "The data is irrefutable, the physics is sound. Muff, the demonstration footage from the planetoid test is conclusive. They will believe us." I asked her what happened if they believed us and still said no. She looked at me then, and her eyes were the eyes of someone who had been living inside an impossible question for 2 years and had never found an answer. She said, "That's not my decision, Captain. That's yours." She was right. The activation code was mine. Admiral Chen had given it to me personally, in a sealed envelope, with instructions that I was authorized to use it at my discretion if the Cathari refused the ultimatum. At my discretion. The extinction of a species. At my discretion. I carried the envelope in my breast pocket for 11 days, and I could feel it against my chest with every breath. On a small rectangle of paper containing a string of numbers that could end 11 billion lives. We entered Cathari space at 0900 UTC. They detected us immediately. 3 warships intercepted us within minutes. They scanned us, found no weapons, and hailed us with what I can only describe as contemptuous curiosity. A single, unarmed human ship in the heart of their territory. They assumed we were surrendering. Their commander told us to stand down and prepare to be boarded. I said we were carrying a message for the Cathari High Command and requested a direct communication channel. The commander laughed, not metaphorically. The Cathari have a vocalization that serves the same social function as human laughter, and he used it. Then he opened the channel, probably because he found the situation amusing enough to share with his superiors. Yeah, I transmitted the demonstration data, the planetoid test footage, the physics documentation, the gravitational resonance equations, and a live feed from our cargo hold showing the resonance transmitter, powered down but ready, with Leon standing next to it, and a real-time readout confirming that it was tuned to the gravitational signature of Cathari Prime. And then I delivered the message. Not a peace proposal. Not a diplomatic overture. Not an olive branch. I said in the clearest, calmest voice I could manage, with my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. This device will be activated if the Cathari hegemony does not transmit an unconditional surrender to all human military frequencies within 60 minutes. The same capability exists for the homeworlds of the Dreth hierarchy, the Tyranny Collective, and the Veshan Dominion, your choice. 47 minutes of silence. The longest 47 minutes of my life. My crew didn't speak. Lean stood in the cargo hold with her hand resting on the transmitter casing. I sat on the bridge with the activation code in my pocket, and a countdown on the screen, and the knowledge that in 13 minutes I was either going to be a diplomat or a murderer. At 0947, the Cathari hegemony transmitted an unconditional surrender. At 10:03, the remaining 3 empires followed. The war was over. Humanity had won. And no one outside that ship, no one in the celebrating crowds, no one at the ceremony in Geneva, no one reading the plaque at the base of the statue knew that we had won by holding a gun to the head of an entire planet and daring them to find out if we would pull the trigger. The olive branch came home. The crew was decorated. The story was told. Courage, diplomacy, the power of peace. The statue went up. The children's choir sang. And I smiled for the cameras and accepted the commendation and shook the hands and gave the interviews. And every night for 6 months, I went home and sat in the dark and felt the weight of the envelope in my pocket, even though I'd burned it the day we returned, even though the code was gone, even though I never used it. Because here's the thing that nobody knows, the thing that keeps me awake, the thing that is going to be in my report to the Security Council in 3 days. During those 47 minutes of silence, at minute 39, with 8 minutes left on the countdown, I opened the envelope. I read the code. And I entered the first 11 digits of a 16-digit activation sequence into the transmitter's command interface. I was going to do it. God help me. I was going to do it. I had 11 digits entered, and my finger was over the 12th when the surrender transmission came through. 5 digits. I was 5 digits away from ending a world. And nobody knows. Not my crew, not Admiral Chen, not Director Osei, not the smiling people in Geneva, not the children who sang about courage. Nobody knows how close it came. Nobody knows that the hero on the statue was 30 seconds away from becoming the worst monster in the history of every species that has ever existed. And in 3 days, I have to decide whether to tell them. The cracks started appearing 3 weeks after we got home, small ones at first. At the kind that only someone who knew the truth would notice. The first was diplomatic. The Cathari ambassador to the newly established Interspecies Council, a senior official named Teth Vasarin, gave a speech during the opening session that was translated and broadcast across every human news network as a statement of gracious concession. Humanity's courage in sending an unarmed ship demonstrated a moral conviction that we could not, in good conscience, continue to oppose. That was the official translation. I watched it from my apartment in Geneva, where I had been given a penthouse suite as part of the hero's package, and I felt the familiar cold settle into my chest. Because I speak Cathari, I learned it during the war, from intelligence briefings and intercepted communications. And what Teth Vasarin actually said, while in the original Cathari, was closer to, the humans demonstrated a capability that made continued resistance inadvisable. Not moral conviction, capability, not courage, threat. The translator had softened it. Someone had told the translator to soften it. The public version of the speech matched the public version of the mission, and the gap between what was said and what was reported was exactly wide enough to hide the truth. The second crack came from my own crew. Lieutenant Commander Marcos Herrera, my second officer, requested a private meeting with me 5 weeks after our return. Marcos had been steady during the mission, controlled, professional. Yet he had sat on the bridge during the 47 minutes of silence and maintained a composure that I had admired at the time and now recognized as the particular stillness of a person who is holding themselves together by force of will. He came to my quarters and he sat down and he said, "Captain, I've been contacted by a journalist." The journalist was named Priya Kaur. She worked for an independent newsfeed that had been covering the war from its earliest days, and she had been asking questions that nobody in the official narrative wanted asked. Specifically, she wanted to know why the 4 empires had surrendered so quickly. Not the how, not the unarmed ship, moral courage, power of peace version. the why, the strategic calculus.
But because Priya Kaur had done what good journalists do, she had looked at the story the way the enemy would look at it, and from that angle, it made no sense. She had published a series of articles pointing out the military absurdity of the official narrative. The Cathari hegemony was the largest military force in the galaxy. They had been winning the war decisively. They had no strategic reason to surrender to an unarmed ship carrying a peace proposal. No empire in recorded galactic history had ever surrendered from a position of overwhelming superiority because the losing side asked nicely. Something else had happened. Something the official story wasn't telling, and she was looking for someone on the crew to confirm it. Marcos hadn't told her anything, but he was shaking when he told me about the contact. Not because he was afraid of the journalist, because he was afraid of himself. He said he wanted to tell her. He said the lie was eating him alive. He said he went to the grocery store last week and a woman recognized him from the ceremony footage and thanked him for saving her grandchildren, and he had to leave because he couldn't breathe. He said, "Captain, we held a planet hostage. We threatened to murder 11 billion people, and they're thanking us for it." I told Marcos to say nothing. I told him the classification was absolute. I told him that the Security Council briefing was coming and that the appropriate authorities would make the appropriate decisions. I said the words and they sounded hollow in my mouth, and Marcos looked at me the way you look at someone who is reciting policy when the building is on fire. After he left, I poured a drink and sat with it and didn't drink it and thought about Priya Kaur and her articles and the fact that she was right. The official story didn't hold up under scrutiny. It was a fairy tale, and fairy tales survive only as long as nobody looks too closely at the wolf's teeth. The third crack was bigger. It came from the Cathari themselves. 6 weeks after the surrender, the Interspecies Council convened a session on post-war reparations. The Cathari delegation submitted a request that was translated in the official proceedings as a petition for mutual security guarantees. The actual document, which I obtained through channels I am not going to describe, was not a petition. It was a demand. Specifically, the Cathari demanded that the resonance technology be dismantled and that all research data be destroyed under international verification. They named the technology. They described its function. They referenced the demonstration data we had transmitted during the ultimatum. They knew exactly what had threatened them, and they wanted it gone. The document was classified within hours of its submission. The public session discussed mutual security guarantees in vague, optimistic terms. The Cathari delegation played along because they had been told through diplomatic back channels that public discussion of the resonance device would be treated by the UEG as a violation of the surrender terms. The Cathari, who had just lost a war to a species that could destroy their homeworld with a shipping container, were not in a position to argue. But the document existed, and it told me something I hadn't known. The Cathari hadn't just surrendered out of fear. They had surrendered because they had run their own analysis of the resonance technology and concluded that it was even worse than we had told them. Lean's device didn't just work on individual planets. The gravitational resonance cascade, if amplified through a star system's own orbital mechanics, could theoretically propagate from one planetary body to another. A single resonance transmitter activated on Cathari Prime could destabilize every planet in the Cathari home system. Not one world, all of them. 8 inhabited worlds, 37 billion people. The Cathari had done the math that Lian hadn't told me about, and the math was worse than the threat I had delivered. I went to Lian. But she was living in a research facility outside of Zurich, technically still employed by the Advanced Research Division, technically still working on defensive applications of gravitational resonance theory. I found her in her lab, surrounded by screens showing equations I couldn't read, and I asked her if the Cathari analysis was correct. Could the cascade propagate system-wide? She didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, "I identified that possibility during initial development. I reported it to Admiral Chen. He instructed me to omit it from the demonstration data provided to the Cathari." I stared at her. "You omitted it?" "I omitted it from the data we showed them. I did not omit it from reality. The Cathari are not stupid. They would have discovered it independently, which they did." So, I asked her why Chen would want that detail omitted. She looked at me with that terrible stillness of hers and said, "Because the mission was designed as a bluff. A bluff works when the threat is large enough to compel surrender, but contained enough that the bluffer can credibly claim they would actually do it.
If the Cathari knew the cascade was system-wide, they might calculate that no sane species would activate it, because the scale of destruction would be so enormous that the bluffer's own moral constraints would prevent follow-through. Chen needed the threat to be believable. Planet scale is believable. System scale looks like a bluff. I sat down heavily. But the Cathari figured it out anyway. Yes, which means they surrendered not because they believed we would destroy one planet, but because they realized we might accidentally destroy 8. The threat wasn't our willingness to kill 11 billion people. It was the possibility that if we activated the device, we couldn't control how far the cascade spread. They surrendered because we were holding a weapon we didn't fully understand, and that was more terrifying than a weapon we did. I left Lean's lab and drove back to Geneva in silence and sat in my penthouse and looked at the statue through the window. 40 meters of polished titanium, humanity's finest hour. Built on a threat we didn't know the full scope of, backed by a willingness to kill that I had come within 5 digits of acting on, celebrated as an act of peace by a world that didn't know its survival had been purchased with the currency of potential omnicide. The fourth crack was the worst. Yes, it came from Director Osei. Osei called me to a meeting at the UEG's communications headquarters 8 weeks after our return. The same Osei who had designed the public narrative. The same Osei who had crafted the unarmed ship moral courage story that the entire world had embraced. She sat across from me in a room with no windows and no recording devices, and she told me something that inverted the last remaining piece of the story I had been telling myself. She said the resonance device was not the only one. During the 2 years of Leon's development, the Advanced Research Division had constructed not 1, but 4 resonance transmitters, the one aboard the Olive Branch, and 3 others, which had been secretly deployed before the mission launched. One was hidden on a derelict freighter adrift in the Dreth home system. One was buried in an asteroid in the Tirani Collective's capital system, and one was concealed in a defunct satellite orbiting the Veshan Dominion's homeworld. 3 additional transmitters, pre-positioned already in place, each one tuned to its target's gravitational signature, each one awaiting an activation signal that could be sent from anywhere in human-controlled space. The Olive Branch was not the threat. The Olive Branch was the advertisement. The real threat was already deployed. The surrenders from the Dreth, Tirani, and Veshan hadn't come because they were afraid of what we might do to the Cathari. They had come because they were quietly informed through diplomatic channels that devices were already in their home systems, already targeting their worlds, and that the Olive Branch's ultimatum applied to all of them simultaneously. I asked Osei why she was telling me this. She said, because the deployed devices are still in place, they have not been retrieved. Chen considers them a permanent deterrent, and in 3 days, you are going to stand before the Security Council and deliver a report on the Olive Branch mission. I need to know what you're going to say. I understood then. The mission wasn't over. The war was over. But the mission, the real mission, was permanent. The resonance transmitters weren't a one-time threat. They were an ongoing occupation. Every empire that had surrendered was living under the shadow of a weapon they couldn't find, couldn't disable, and couldn't defend against. The peace, the celebrated peace, the peace that had statues and ceremonies and children's choirs was not peace. It was a hostage situation. The entire galactic order, every empire, every species was being held at gunpoint by devices they couldn't see, controlled by a species that the galaxy now believed had won through moral courage. And the hero of the story, the captain of the unarmed ship, the woman on the statue, was the only person outside the military and political leadership who knew all of it. The bluff, the cascade, the pre-deployed devices, the permanent deterrent, the lie. All of it lived in my head, and in 3 days, I had to decide what to put in the report. I went home. I sat in the dark. I thought about Marcos, who couldn't breathe in a grocery store because a grandmother thanked him for saving her grandchildren. I thought about Lien, who had built a weapon she couldn't control and reported the risk and been told to hide it. I thought about the Cathari ambassador, choosing his words carefully in a language that was being deliberately mistranslated. I thought about Priakor, who knew the story was wrong and couldn't prove it. I thought about the 4 resonance transmitters, 3 of them still out there, orbiting the homeworlds of species that thought they had surrendered to peace and were actually living under the threat of annihilation. And I thought about the 11 digits, the ones I had entered, the ones that meant I had been willing, not hypothetically, not theoretically, willing. My finger on the key. 30 seconds from ending a world. If the surrender had come 30 seconds later, I would have entered the 12th digit, and the 13th, and the 14th, and the 15th, and the 16th. And Cathari Prime would be dead. I knew it. I had felt it in my hand. The willingness, the cold, arithmetic willingness that comes when you have been told your species has 14 months to live and the only tool left is the worst one ever made. That willingness is the truth, not the statue, not the ceremony, not the olive branch. The willingness. I wrote the report. It took me 2 days. I wrote 3 versions. The first was the official narrative. Diplomatic mission, moral courage, peaceful resolution. Every word a lie. I deleted it. The second was the complete truth. Resonance, the ultimatum, the pre-deployed devices, the cascade risk, the 11 digits, everything. I read it and felt the weight of what it would do. The peace would collapse. Lest the empires would learn that the devices were still in their systems. They would demand removal. If they didn't get it, the war would restart. Except now, they would be fighting not out of expansion or contempt, but out of existential terror. The truth would not free anyone. It would arm everyone. I deleted that version too. The third version is the one I'm going to deliver. It is the truth, but not all of it. It confirms the resonance technology. It confirms the ultimatum. It confirms that the mission was a threat, not a diplomatic gesture. But it omits the pre-deployed devices. It omits the cascade risk. And it omits the 11 digits. I am going to tell the Security Council enough truth to end the fairy tale, but not enough to end the peace. That I am going to give them a version that is honest about what we did, but dishonest about how far we were willing to go and how far we have already gone. I am going to replace one lie with a smaller lie, and I am going to do it because the alternative is a galaxy that knows it is being held hostage by a species that can destroy solar systems and has already put the guns in place. Marcos will understand. He doesn't want the world to know he's a hero. He wants to be able to breathe in a grocery store. A partial truth gives him that. It takes the cape off without dropping the bomb. Lean will not understand. Lean wants the full data published. She wants the cascade risk known. She wants every species in the galaxy to understand exactly what resonance can do. Why? Because she believes that a fully informed galaxy will agree to collectively dismantle the technology. She is probably right in theory and certainly wrong in practice, because the first thing any empire will do with full resonance data is try to build their own. The Cathari will probably know the report is incomplete. They already know about the cascade. They will know I omitted it, and they will have to decide, as I have decided, whether the partial truth is better than the whole one. I keep thinking about something Teth Vasaran said at the first council session, in Cathari, not in the translation. He said, "We surrendered because we understood what you were willing to become to survive. That willingness is more dangerous than any weapon, and it is the one thing you cannot disarm." He was talking about resonance, but he was also talking about me, about the 11 digits, about the 30 seconds, about the cold arithmetic that I performed in my head while my finger hovered over the key, the calculation that said 11 billion Cathari lives weighed against 8 billion human lives, and found the numbers close enough to make the choice imaginable. That is what the Cathari saw. Not courage, not peace, the willingness of a species to weigh worlds against each other and press the button. And they surrendered because a species that can make that calculation, that can hold that willingness in a steady hand, is a species you do not test. That is what the statue in Geneva actually commemorates, not an olive branch, a willingness, and the entire peace, the entire post-war order, the entire future of interspecies relations, rests on the hope that nobody ever calls us on it. 3 days. I'll deliver the report. The Security Council will classify it. The partial truth will live in a vault. The statue will stay up. The children's choir recording will keep playing at memorial events. And I will go home to my penthouse and sit in the dark and carry the remaining weight alone, because someone has to. And I am the one who put her finger on the key. Lean asked me the last time I saw her if I would have done it. If the surrender had come 60 seconds later instead of 30. If I had reached the 16th digit. I told her I didn't know. That was the truth. It is also, I think, the most dangerous truth of all. Not that I would have. Not that I wouldn't have. That I don't know. That the woman on the statue, the hero of humanity's finest hour, I cannot tell you with certainty whether she would have killed 11 billion people if given 30 more seconds, and neither can anyone else. That's the real lesson. That's the thing the fairy tale hides, and the partial truth will hide, and the full truth would burn. Not that humanity built a planet killer, not that we threatened genocide to win a war, but that when we held the weapon and faced the countdown and felt the arithmetic settle into our bones, we did not know what we would do. We balanced on the edge of the worst act in the history of consciousness, and we did not fall, but we did not step back either. We just stood there, on the edge, for 47 minutes, and then that they surrendered. And we called it courage. The statue is 40 meters tall. It gleams in the sun. On clear days, you can see it from across the lake. Yeah, children take photographs in front of it. Tour guides tell the story. The plaque says, humanity's finest hour. I walk past it every morning on my way to work, and every morning I count. 12, 13, 14, 15. I always stop at 15, one short of the end of a world. And I keep walking, because that is all I can do. Keep walking, keep carrying the number, keep being the woman who stopped at 15 and will never know for certain whether 16 was coming. The statue doesn't know. The world doesn't know. In 3 days, the Security Council will know part of it. But the whole truth, the 11 digits I entered and the 5 I didn't. The 30 seconds that separated humanity's finest hour from its darkest, that truth lives only here, in this account, in the space between 15 and 16, in the gap between the hero and the monster, which turned out to be nothing more than a half-minute of silence and the sound of a surrender arriving just in time. I don't know what I am. I don't think anyone who has stood where I stood can, but I know what the statue says I am, and I know what I almost was, and the distance between them is 5 digits and 30 seconds and the rest of my life. Share.